There's this game that came out in 2010 called Dinner Date. You begin being told that you do not play as yourself, neither do you play as the main character. You play as, quote, the subconscious motorics of Julian Luxemburg. The game has 500 mixed reviews on Steam, and is the only thing ever to be released by the publisher. People's response to the game was less than favourable. You go through the 10-ish minute experience in first person. You'll hear your thoughts, you get to eat bread, smoke cigarettes, and at one point, you can even choose to stow your soup clockwise or counterclockwise. Your actual date in Dinner Date doesn't show. So you sit alone in your apartment, feeling sorry for yourself, getting drunk, quoting poetry, and in the end, you decide to go out with friends instead. You grab your coat, and you leave. I don't really know why I remember this game. It's not the story, the weird control system, or even the bizarre tone. It's not even that it kind of reminds you of Peep Show, one of my favourite shows ever. Look, I don't want to make out like this game is some kind of underrated masterpiece, or that it changed my life, but it's more this feeling of personal isolation. For all the incredible games I've played over the years, these games, often made by solo individuals, feel less like writers writing a story, but more like fragments of people's psyche, and that makes them interesting, if nothing else. I've had this feeling in other games too. "2014's Presentable Liberty is similarly a game about people, but only starring one person. You start your experience in a jail cell. You have a door, a bed, and a tiny window that looks out onto the sky. You spend virtually the entirety of the game within the confines of this cell. You receive information about the outside world from a range of characters who write to you, telling you that the world has been plagued by a virus that has killed off 98% of the world's population. I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention the parallels between this and the pandemic. Trapped in a room as a result of a global virus, communicating via messages from the outside world. But this game was made years before the pandemic even happened. In the finale of the game, among the messages you receive is one from Charlotte, who you've been exchanging messages with the entire time. She has also been isolated and wants to finally meet you at her bakery. Another letter is from a recurring character called Salvador, who hatches a plan to break you out, all while you still receive letters from Charlotte about how she can't deal with the loneliness anymore. When Salvador finally succeeds in breaking you out, you realise that your prison cell has been an elevator in an apartment block this entire time. You've been trapped in this place, with the route to the outside world mockingly close to you. You're given the option to remain in your cell or take it down to the bottom of the building, which, should you do, you will find Charlotte's bakery, but you arrive too late. She's already dead. Part of me wonders, beyond the story we're presented with, if the player actually had this control all along. Perhaps this inescapable space, this prison, was not merely enforced by heavy doors or bars, but something equally as debilitating. This personal isolation, being stuck inside somewhere, with a looming fear of being too late or missing out. It's an instinct you can try to fight, or accept that it will overcome you. One is not necessarily easier than the other. Being inside spares you all the unpredictability the outside world comes with. Perhaps this is the liberty we're presented with in Presentable Liberty. There is a certain stereotype of the creative that this lends to, that the act of locking oneself away, becoming a recluse, seems to help the process. It was in the year of 1889 when Vincent van Gogh admitted himself into the St. Paul de Mazul lunatic asylum. He would stay here for a year. He had his own room and was even able to use a spare room on the ground floor as his painting studio. Much like our protagonist in the jail cell, Van Gogh isolated with a barred window in his room. While many associate his work with his descent into madness, they are also ascribed to what tethered him to a positive state of mind. Despite his surroundings, he was reportedly happy here. As someone who struggled to find his belonging in the outside world, he was free to concentrate on the thing that was most important to him. In different circumstances, it sounds like a creative's dream come true. However, of course, it was not all good. He was still in an asylum after all, and still suffered bouts of mental episodes. If Presentable Liberty so perfectly linked us to beginning this discussion on Van Gogh, this next game continues right on from the end of it. A 2015 release, The Static Speaks My Name. This one is different from the other two. It's an uncomfortable experience, distinctly darker. It encases you in the concrete shoes of madness, then throws you into the depths of malevolence. You start off in the dark void of space, I guess, an ethereal mass floating among nothingness. You approach a blurring, twitching anomaly. You are given a name, an age, and a cause of death, and all of a sudden, you awaken as that person. You explore your dark house, clean the microwave, talk to your online friend, as an uncanny, almost demonic photograph stares back at you. Is this how our character sees the world? Is this how our character sees himself? Much like Van Gogh, we seem to see the world through painting, and you become unsubtly aware that the person you're playing has a particular obsession with the painting of a pair of palm trees. Duplicated versions of it cover your walls, notes analysing it, easels attempting to recreate it. Your character is looking for something, searching for meaning. A newspaper cutting stuck to the fridge describes the disappearance of a local artist. Then, a manhole-sized penny drops as you see that artist in a cage in the corner of a room in your house. The ending of this game, well, let's just say I won't be showing it here. I've been torn on this game. I haven't been sure what to think of it, of what it was trying to say in the end. I actually watched some videos by the developer where he talks about how this was based, at least somewhat, on his personal experiences, which again, like our previous two games, gave it a sense of messed up intimacy. After this person's story is over, you are presented with more. Approaching each one, a name is stated, an age, and an unnatural cause of death. They all sound pretty much as gruesome and as horrible as each other. Despite that, the game forces you to select one of them. If you eventually manage to suppress whatever reservations you may have for long enough and choose one, the credits appear, unlike almost every other game I can think of. It's an experience that makes you so relieved that there isn't any more of it. But maybe that's the point. Perhaps in role-playing this tortured mind, in some twisted way, we're supposed to be relieved that it's all over? For artists like Van Gogh, there was no choice between a regular vocation or being an artist. It's who he is, regardless, no matter how much the world tries to envelop him, how much it tries to absorb him into normality. This brings me to What Remains of Edith Finch, a game where you relive the traumas of an unfortunate family. At one point in the game, you experience the world as Lewis Finch. And when I say you experience the world as him, I mean just that. Working in a canning factory, you are tasked with the menial job of moving fish across the screen to a guillotine. In conjunction with this, you are then presented with a figure on the left side of your screen who you also control. Starting in a dark space, progressing to a village, a town full of people, setting sail on a ship to a distant land, recounting the adventures you've been on, all while the imaginary world grows to cover more of the screen, and you are still having to actively chop fish in the real world. Except now, they're in the way of your imaginings. You need to get rid of them, so they don't block your experience of this magical land. While living out this maladaptive daydream, you hear a report from Lewis's psychologist in the background, describing him as becoming a model worker at the factory, doing insane shifts at the peak of productivity. But it also describes him as resenting that person, the one at the factory, cutting that fish. It pains him to remember, to think that someone with such dreams, such imagination as to create entire empires, will, in the real world, be known as someone who put fish into a guillotine. It was enough to drive Lewis to join the fate of so many of the fish before him. And there, I think I found it. That thread linking all of these experiences together. They're not just about isolation. but about the task of balancing oneself against the expectations of the outside world. They're about being a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. A feeling I think lots of people with a passion for creating things have when balancing it against the reality of life. And I suppose it's around the end of the year where a lot of us take stock and think about our future, our past. And the funny thing about all of this is, a few months ago I actually made a video whereby I obsessed over a painting by an artist. And although I don't have them locked up in a room somewhere, it does make me think. Like many of you, I've had jobs that have been purely a means to an end, even when there's been no end in sight. Muscle memory routines it felt like my body learned, so I could spend more time imagining all the things I actually wanted to do when this was all over. Going back to Dinner Date, another reason it caught my eye was that being in 2011, it wasn't as easy to make a game as it is now. And as many people who enjoy playing games, the idea of making one was somewhat of a dream to me. So I was fascinated by how this could be achieved by one person before the days of pre-packaged user-friendly engines. Looking back, there are actually a fair amount of articles discussing this game when it first released, which in itself is really a sign of the times. I can't imagine with the way the industry and technology have shifted, games being created in such an abundance, that one like this would ever get the coverage it once did. Now, and again, this isn't even about this specific game. Everything, it feels like, has increased at such an exponential rate that it sometimes feels as though if you aren't constantly working on things, you'll be left behind, never finish, or be substandard to the constantly rising threshold of the talents of other people. There was a period in my life when I got up to catch the train to work. I had such a routine that I knew exactly where to stand on the platform to within a margin of inches from where the doors would stop, and I would do the same thing on the way home, snaking through crowds of slow walkers, anticipating where people would block me off, cutting diagonal shortcuts through crowds of individual obstacles, being frustrated that people would stand on the left of escalators. Admittedly, I turned into a bit of an animal when I needed to go and stand in that specific location, catch that train. And the irony is that despite the theme of this video, I spent so much time navigating through masses of people, bodies, so I could spend more time alone. How many of us feel a creeping, irrational, unfair guilt when we realise we spent hours of our weekend playing a game? In the system that many of us live in, spare time is often made to feel like wasted time. So then we spend our time doing personal projects, creating things, writing overthinking pieces about video games. Then you have to consider the day job, the bills, the chores, personal life, future, your health. How often do we really truly just allow ourselves to be isolated? Not just physically from other people, but from our own restrictions and expectations. It was when I was doing research for one of my other videos that I came across this painting. The sheer enormity of it blew me away, and I thought about how amazing it would have looked in person. I then realised it was located in a museum in my city, which I should have known. I used to go to museums all the time. In fact, I used to go to a lot of places. I somehow got to a point where I remember something that happened last year, only to realise it happened 4 years ago. It seems like I made it my mission to ensure that I tried to cut out as much unnecessary time as possible outside of work hours. But at some point, this section of my brain, determined to attack everything outside my margin of personal time, began attacking itself like an overactive immune system. When you have to spend so many hours of your day working a job, I think there is this heightened desire to force all of your leftover energy, that free time, into the stuff you really want to make, to throw everything unnecessary into the furnace, to keep that engine burning, to keep that train running, barreling along in the hopes you'll eventually reach that unguaranteed destination. But the problem with that is you're stuck on that track. You can't get off. And all that other stuff life has to offer can just pass you by in a blur. So after I finish recording this, maybe I'll go somewhere that isn't work, isn't my house, isn't me getting from A to B. Maybe I'll go to a museum. When your life becomes so rooted in work, sometimes it feels like isolation is the antithesis of that. a necessary part of the balance. But isolation doesn't just have to mean being alone. It can be stepping away from your constant expectations, doing things that invigorate you, not just alienate you. It means distancing yourself not only from your stresses, but sometimes maybe even your comforts too. Oh, and by the way, Merry Christmas. I originally worked on this video a few months ago, and I didn't really know when I was going to release it, but I wondered what I could do that was vaguely Christmassy. So obviously I chose this somewhat depressing monologue, but this can be a potentially lonely time of year for some, and the end of the year in general can bring about feelings of progression or lack thereof. So this is a message to relax and try to take it easy. This channel has progressed in the past year, and I am genuinely happy about that. I have a lot of future videos in the work. I'm starting more ideas than I can finish writing, and writing more videos than I can finish recording. But I suppose that's a good problem to have, but I already have a pretty good idea of the stuff I'm going to be releasing next year, which will be the next time I see you. So I hope you enjoy the rest of this one. Maybe have an eggnog, or me, and treat yourself to my back catalogue.
I beg your pardon?
And watch some of my other videos over the festive period. Look, this one got 50 views. But for now, I'll see you next year.